Quite early after Jesus returned to Galilee following his baptism in the Jordan by John, he decided to visit his hometown of Nazareth. Now, he had already commenced his public ministry. He based himself in Capernaum and began his ministry initially by preaching in the synagogues. And of course, he began to heal a number of people. But then as the crowds began to increase, he began to speak publicly. When he went to Nazareth, as we read last week, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and we read the story last week. He was handed the scroll. He found a place where, in the scroll of Isaiah, he quoted from and then began to speak. And we heard at the beginning of the gospel today what he said at the beginning of his preaching. This word is being fulfilled, even as you listen. St. Luke goes on to comment that initially the people were very impressed by what he had to say. It was very well received. His message was well received. And so St. Luke comments, he won the approval of all, and they were astonished by the gracious words that came from his lips. But then some murmurs began. This is Joseph's son, surely, somebody said. Probably in our contemporary idiom, we would say, just who does this man think he is? Jesus responds to this questioning and doubt that was being expressed by challenging them about examples from Israel's history of how God showed his mercy to those who were not members of the chosen people. This comment enrages his listeners, and we read how they turn against him. Thus we know from the very early stages of the public ministry of the Lord that he meets resistance. And criticism and rejection would become the feature of the years of his public ministry. Already, if you like, the shadow of the cross has fallen across him. Yesterday I was reading the letters to the editor section of the Mercury newspaper. I'm sure others of you have as well. And there was a particular section devoted to the issue of religious freedom. And the letters, all of them that were published, challenged the right of the churches to be able to express and live by their beliefs. Normally, they speak about in the name of tolerance. They would deny the right of the free expression of religious convictions in word and action. In other words, in the end, what these arguments are doing is they are saying that the churches should comply with the current ethos in our society. They really want Catholic teaching and action to mirror the prevailing secular view of life in our society. So as one writer said, parents and clients expect staff in these religious bodies to be selected on the basis of competence and not adherence to a doctrine or loyalty to a bishop. In other words, they want our faith-based services in education, health and social work, if you like, to be a faith-free zone. Now, we can't do this, because to abandon the faith dimension of our ministry would reduce all our works to nothing more than being another NGO, and there are plenty of them. See, the Catholic Church is very present in education, health and social services because in the past, religious orders saw human need and responded in works of service, but service inspired by their faith. Theirs was not mere philanthropy, but it had a spiritual purpose and spiritual motivation. Ultimately, they sought to mediate the love of God to those whom they served. Because the church has always understood that faith must flow through into acts of love. And we know that the Lord expects us to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, care for the sick, reach out to the stranger, as the Lord teaches us in Matthew 25. And our works are distinctive because they are inspired by Christ and align with his moral teachings. So we cannot divorce our works from our understanding, inspired by divine revelation about the nature of human life and God's good plan for human flourishing. We are not value-free and will not be value-free in what we do. It's precisely our Christian understanding of what makes human life truly human that urges us not only to do good works, but to have this faith underpin what we do. If we surrender what gives true worth to our actions, then we'll fail not only God, but the people that we serve. Because the true fruitfulness of our works depends on their grounding in the teachings of Christ and the church. In his letter to the Romans, St. Paul puts this very clearly. He says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may prove what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." The Bill on Religious Freedom, which is currently before the federal government, is very important and much needed at this time, as there are now very real threats to religious freedom here in Australia. All citizens should be free to publicly express and live by their deeply held religious beliefs. After all, this is a basic international principle of justice, which has been enshrined in the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights and in subsequent international documents. The only basis for restricting freedom of speech should be when it involves libel or directly and explicitly promotes hatred and violence towards others, and we would never do this. From the outset of his public ministry, the Lord encountered criticism and resistance. And this has been the lot of Christians throughout history. So we should not be surprised by the criticism we are currently encountering. Now, the Lord's comment in the Gospel today remains very true, because the church is a prophetic voice in our society. When he says, "No prophet is ever accepted in his own country." However, we also have a right in a democratic society like Australia to ask our government to protect our freedom of speech and activity. And I believe that all reasonable and fair-minded people will see that the bill for what it really is, very simply, an attempt to achieve a long overdue equity in the treatment of religion with regard to current anti-discrimination laws.